everybody. Welcome to the deep freeze of January. I hope you're all doing well. We will get started at 7:32, and I'll ask if there's any adjustments to the agenda.
So Amy, I don't know if we'll have an adjustment, but at the time that we set this agenda up, we thought that we would be walking through that waterfall list. So there's probably more time than necessary for the June 2025 service reduction recommendations.
Okay.
And the only reason why this matters is that I know that Sandy is not able to join us earlier. And so if we get ahead of schedule, we may need to move like 8 or 9 up earlier.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. And as I get going and forget that detail, please feel free just to rein me back in.
Yes.
Okay, any other adjustments? Okay, so we will move on to public comment. Is there anybody from the public here who'd like to make a comment? Okay, seeing none and assuming there's no one in the boardroom with you, Clayton, you would have told me.
Yeah.
We will continue on. So the next bit is the consent agenda, which includes the January 7th board meeting minutes and the check register. Does anybody want to make a motion to approve the consent agenda or make any comment about it?
I'll move to approve.
I'll
Thanks,
second.
Andrea. Thanks, Bob. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Phil, you're abstaining? Gotcha. Okay. The consent agenda passes. And so we are going to mightily quick move on to the 2025 service reduction presentation. And I'm going to pass that off to Clayton to kick us off maybe.
Yes, and something that I do want to point out, and sorry that I didn't think about this for the adjustment of the agenda. I want to welcome Ruben McMartin, who is our alternate for Washington County now, and with Christian Mayor unavailable today, is sitting in for Washington County. So welcome, Ruben.
Good morning.
Thanks.
Welcome, Ruben. It's nice to meet you.
And so getting to our presentation on the service reductions and then the action on Pine Street changes. As I mentioned before, we had planned with our roadmap to be providing you all with our next cut list here. I decided to change course simply because a week from today, we're going to be getting the governor's budget, and depending on what the governor's budget has for GMT will significantly alter our plans. And so I made the decision, and I hope the board is okay, that instead of coming up with a cut list first, that we would wait to see what the governor's budget includes and then build to that. And I didn't like the idea of, especially with some of the recent correspondence that has happened regarding the number 10 and communities anxious about potential service being eliminated in their areas, that if we could avoid that, if it's not necessary, I think that that would be positive. And so that's why the change. And so I'm going to turn this over to Chris. Chris has been outstanding to work with as we go through this process. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows, you know, how well our new planning director is doing, and certainly to jump right in as he has with his new role during this time is something that I greatly appreciate. So Chris, take it away.
Except I'm going to interrupt, Chris. As long as we're throwing compliments, you said something at our Not Retreat the other day that really floored me, and it was how you were planning the Pine Street to make sure that people were walking downhill with their groceries. And I just really appreciated that attention to detail and adding that level of kindness into what you were doing. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Clayton. So let me just go ahead. I have a brief presentation. Let's see if the technology cooperates. Do folks see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Awesome, excellent. So last meeting 2 weeks ago, as you all know, we walked through a bunch of maps and service concepts for the potential June service reductions. And today, sort of the goal is really putting those service reductions into perspective of other statistics that we have discussed either as part of sort of this service reduction process or other discussions that the board has had either at committee levels or other board meetings. And so, first off, at the onset of last summer, when we released the initial service reduction plan and the conversation started, the pre-reduction level of pay hours is around 125,000 hours of service in our urban system. Again, this is just scheduled. Our actual numbers do tend to be higher based off of operational needs or other contractual obligations, but this is the sort of total pizza pie that we're dealing with in terms of service as of the beginning of the last summer. And so, when we released that plan and sort of our service before, the breakout by day type for weekday, Saturdays, and Sundays was the following. So 86% of our service represents weekdays. On Saturdays, that represents about 10% of our service, and then Sunday service represents about 4% of that entire pie of service. And so of all of that weekday service that we do operate, 84% of that is dedicated to local routes here in Chittenden County, and 16% of that is dedicated to commuter and link service. And so when you compare this subset of our service to the entirety of it, the commuter and link percentage goes down to about 14% of our overall service delivery. And so over here on the left-hand side of the screen, we're showing what the scheduled pay hours are by service type from what was proposed last August to now. And so the first round on the graph represents the Saturday reductions, the elimination of the Jeffersonville commuter, and the transfer of the 116 commuter. The second round represents reductions on the Milton commuter, the St. Albans link, and Montpelier link. And then the third round on the screen on the left represents sort of the largest bulk of cuts, which was all the stuff that was identified in the original slate that was presented last August. And so the original proposal outlined about a 7% reduction in service in the first round, an 18% reduction in the second round, and then finally, the third round was a cumulative total of 39% reduction in service, and that was what we needed to get to sort of that original $3 million target that the board set back last summer. And so on the right-hand side, the graph shows how service has been adjusted and sort of approved so far at the board level. Right now, the first round matches exactly what was originally proposed. So we see again that 7% reduction in service hours. In the second round, you can see that the curve sort of flattens out a little bit, and it's not as sharp as we made some modifications to better balance those service levels with ridership on the commuter and link changes. And so on this screen, I recognize there's a lot of text. You don't need to read it all now. We'll also send this out afterwards. So these are some potential scenarios based off of the information that we presented at the board meeting 2 weeks ago, as well as at the public meeting. So these are sort of different flavors of what was presented as a couple different scenarios. And so right now, if no additional funds were found, we are facing the need to cut an additional 16,000 to 18,000 pay hours of service. So right now, only scenario 1 and 2 on the screen would actually get us to that number. I'll talk about scenario 3 and 4 a little bit later. And so scenario 1 is the sort of most dramatic of the first two, which really calls for the elimination of many local routes. And this scenario is a little bit over that 16,000 to 18,000 number. But again, recognizing things may change gives us a little bit of buffer room. And so scenario 2, this one calls for modifications of some of the routes, as we discussed a couple weeks ago, and much fewer route reductions than the sort of more draconian scenario of scenario 1 on the left-hand side. So again, just to reiterate, one of the goals that we've had as we sort of navigate developing the original service reduction plan or adjusting service recommendations, as noted earlier, is to really balance where ridership currently is with service levels. And we've seen that with the adjustment to the commuter and link, as well as the adjustments through decreases of frequency on some of the routes on weekends. And so the graph on the shown here is portraying service hours overlaid with ridership over the past 6 fiscal years. So in green, the amount of service hours, and in orange is the corresponding ridership in respective to each of the different route groupings. And so on the left-hand side, we have that information for local service, and on the right-hand side, we have that for commuter. And so one thing to note on our sort of core local or urban routes here in Chittenden County, our amount of service hours are relatively the same. I think it was about 1% difference, but we have seen now a 3% increase in ridership over that time from FY19 to FY24. On the commuter side, what you see is a much larger reduction in service as well as ridership. So over there, we see about a 25% reduction in service hours and about a 53% reduction in ridership on those routes.
And Chris, before we move on to the next, I
Yep.
want to point out the stat that you and I came up with to prepare some legislative stuff, which is that with our fare data that we now have, we can take a look at to see how the return to fares has impacted ridership. And I'm very happy to report that we have not had the 16% dip in ridership that was originally predicted returning to fares. In fact, if you look back, since fares have come back, we've had a 1% increase overall. And so we're maintaining our ridership despite the return to fares. And so my hope is that some of that is because our new system is much more rider friendly as far as options, and that when Stephen Faubel did the report suggesting a 16% reduction, that was assuming that we would return to the previous, largely cash-based system.
And so here, again, going back to the sort of service delivery types. So the graph here is displaying our fluctuation in percentage of our total ridership that has been attributed either to local service or commuter and link service. As you can see in FY19 and FY20, we saw what was sort of a pretty typical split for GMT in the mid, 2015 through 2020 of about 92 to 93% of rides going to local routes and about 7 to 8% of a ridership going to commuter and link routes. Obviously in FY21 with the shift of the pandemic, that really changed to what we've seen pretty consistently now over the past 4 full fiscal years of that 96, 97% of our ridership going to local routes, and that remaining 4% going to our commuter and link routes. And so, I just want to bring up again, I'm going back and forth from the beginning of this process to sort of where we are now, and just really wanted to highlight 4 of the things that we talked about from that survey that went out to various stakeholders, board members, staff, the public, municipal partners, on asking really what are those transit priorities. And that was really part of because of a sort of absence of service guidelines and really wanting to know how should we guide this service process. And so again, on the screen is sort of the 4 overarching concepts that all 4 of those groups really aligned on, which was, really focusing on our service on riders who rely on public transit as their main mode, really focusing on local service, focusing on weekday service over weekend, and then some more direct routings in that service. And so the next few slides are just a brief preview. We got sent the upcoming FY24 route performance report from VTrans. So this has been something that has been discussed at a board level of one of the ways that we can use to measure our service. And certainly this is how the state is measuring our service. This report really looks at the heart of it, really looks at sort of efficiency of the service, or the cost per passenger by each route within each of the routes' respective categories. And so all of GMT's urban local routes are in their own category, and then our commuter and link routes are compared with other commuter routes across the state. And so the state deems routes successful if a route costs about 2/3 of the class average or less per passenger, but if it costs 50% more than the class average on a per passenger basis, then that route is deemed not acceptable. And so you can see here on the screen, the class average for our local routes are around that $6 to $7 range. Many of the routes within acceptable, some in that successful, like the Essex and the Williston. And then as you can see here, the Williston Essex route is far above the acceptable threshold. And the report identifies that this route has been in the unacceptable range for the past 9 years. And the airport route, this is the first year that it's actually in the acceptable threshold, whereas the past 3 years, it's been in the not acceptable range per the VTrans report.
Chris, could you explain again how these thresholds are determined?
Yeah, so basically there's, for our urban system, it's a little bit different than the rest of it, because this is only looking at, comparing all of our routes against each other. And so here it looks at the gross cost of all of these routes that you see here on the screen, and divides it essentially by the ridership of all those routes to get the class average, which is the brown bar on the left-hand side. So that's, on average, our urban service costs around $6 to $7 per passenger. And so
class average is just the average of all of our urban.
Correct. So for example, like the Williston Essex route did a little bit worse this year. And so that pushed the gap between successful and acceptable just a little bit wider, because again, we're being measured against our own routes.
Okay. And the difference between the acceptable and successful is what
So
percentage are you using?
Yep. So acceptable is 50% more than the class average, and then successful is 2/3 below it's like a 33% reduction from the class average.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. So this is the same information just for our commuter and link routes. So you can see in the blue box, these are the routes that GMT operates within our urban service area. 2 of them, decisions have already been made for those. So that's the 116 commuter and the Jeffersonville commuter. And then as you can see, the other 3 commuter and link routes, they're hovering around either in the acceptable threshold or in the successful threshold. But I will note again, when we're talking about that sort of big service pie, it's the entire service. And so the cost per passenger here, even on these commuter and links, are about 3 to 5 times higher than the cost per passenger on many of our local routes in the core local service. And so finally, a reminder that if no additional funds are identified, then what we have to cut is that 16 to 18,000 hours of additional service. We spent a little bit of time today on the breakdown of service hours and ridership as we face the largest of the 3 service reductions coming up. As we think about the plan, staff is certainly very conscious of, I think we've heard a lot about the potential transit debt spiral, but also recognizing the situation that we're in, where how transit is currently funded both at the federal and state level is really evaluated most notably through efficiency numbers. So those are the stick factors that we've talked about before. And as I noted in the route performance report, the way that it's measured really is on sort of the efficiency of those routes. And so as Clayton alluded to in his read ahead, and as he mentioned at the beginning of this item, we really wanted to put into the conversation what the remaining link and commuter service represents. And so after the the reductions and modifications that the board have approved, the remaining commuter and link service is about 8,500 yearly pay hours. And, you know, as the board contemplates the rural transfer and what is the mission of the organization, if commuter and link service either wasn't operated or was transferred to another provider, those hours could be freed up to retain local service if that is the direction that you know the board would like to take. You know, those 8,500 hours equal about half of scenario 2, which was earlier in the presentation, which was sort of the lesser of two evils of the 18,000 hour scenario. Or 8,500 hours could equal somewhere between scenarios 4 and 5 on the screen here, which you'll be able to sort of digest after the meeting. And again, you know, emphasizing none of these scenarios are finalized. It could even change from what these 5 different situations are. But as we find out, hopefully, you know, the funding picture from the state level, these are sort of all the different things that we're thinking about internally as we talk about it.
And
So
Chris, if I could ask you to go back to back to sharing and
Yeah.
go to the 2 slides that show the newest route performance costs for comparison of local and of commuter.
This one right here.
Yes, and so you know, one of the things that does, you know, jump out to me is that in order for us to reach our guideline or our, you know, target reductions, we're gonna have to be cutting things on this list where you can see our, you know, by and large, $10 per ride and under. And then when you look at the next slide for the commuter routes, you can see that, you know, these are the cost per rider are significantly more. And one of the things that I think that we need as the board to consider is, you know, whether we should target commuter services more for savings based on the fact that they're moving so many fewer folks per dollar. And so I think that to me is probably the biggest thing that we're going to need to get from the board today is kind of where they fall on this. Certainly we recognize that there is a benefit to connecting Montpelier, St. Albans and further, you know, to Burlington. But it does mean that there will be, to retain that service means cutting more local service, cutting more of the service that our municipalities that pay their, you know, local match contributions, you know, are probably going to care about more. And so that was the only item that I wanted to share, Chris.
Right, thank you. And I'll stop sharing so we can see everyone.
So time for questions, yeah?
Yes, please.
I have a question while others are maybe formulating their questions. Chris, what was the change in the airport shuttle that did it have an increase in ridership?
A slight increase in ridership, yep. So that was really what put it, you know, from the sort of just above the not acceptable range to the acceptable range on there. There was a little bit of, you know, we've done some, that's probably been the route that we've done the most sort of schedule adjustments as well. So there's been some improvements hopefully there as well to make it a little bit more on time. So hopefully that's helped.
Okay. All right. Susan, do you have a question?
Your
I saw you come off mute.
Yeah, I was just curious, Chris, if you have any sense of like what the pent up capacity might exist in the urban system. Do we have any idea like what the opportunity is?
In terms of, are you looking at like
Increasing service in the urban system?
So to my understanding, you know, we draw down, but I'll let others chime in, but we draw down pretty much, at least from a federal funding standpoint, you know, we draw down all that we can for federal funds for our service.
I was talking about the capacity for increased ridership in the urban system.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of what in like last board meeting at the retreat, when we're looking at sort of this resource constrained situation that we're in and trying to adjust some of the service, like for example the adjustments to City Center and South Burlington, that's where we certainly see from a pure ridership standpoint, there's over 1,500 folks going in there, and we know what their destination is 5 times a week, going to either UVM or UVM Medical Center. So that's certainly, an area that staff has identified as an area that we know there's, I don't want to say guaranteed ridership, but that's pretty darn close to guaranteed ridership as you can get.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Go ahead, Michael. And then, oh goodness, all those hands. We'll get there. I saw you, Bob.
Yes, thank you very much. That was an excellent presentation. I was just wondering, when we were making these calculations, of just referencing something that Chapin said at the last meeting, and maybe he'll be talking about it now, is the need to sort of also revisit all the different ridership fees and also potential savings, as he referenced. Would that change this in any way? Because right now, I believe we're looking at it in sort of a static way. This is what we assumed 3 million X, months ago. Would that change the factor in any way?
Yeah, certainly, if some of the stuff that we talked about, I think there was 4 different things that Chapin identified at the last meeting, that certainly could factor that in. At this point in time, we don't have any sort of projections for what that would be. And some of that does require a decision, particularly changing the fare. That's something that right now isn't factored into sort of what I presented, but certainly as we have decision points made or have a better idea of what direction we're heading, that would certainly adjust the scenarios that I talked about.
If I can provide a quick update, the safety committee did meet last week and did endorse the idea of moving away from the let them ride policy as I think we expected. And so that right there, represents somewhere between 5 and 10% of our rides currently are for folks who are not paying. And so I don't know if changing the let them ride policy will mean that there'll just be fewer rides, or if those folks will convert into paying riders.
All right, I think I have Bob and then Chapin, Tasha, Phil.
Okay, so our question was related to the commuter number not changing since our shutdown, and yet the urban riders have gone up. So for those commuters, do we know if that's a result of the working patterns, that people aren't having to come into work so much, or more people back into their cars and driving by themselves? I don't know if there's any data that can show you that, or if regional planning has data that can show you that. Have the commuter cars gone up where they should have been on the bus instead?
I don't know the answer to that, Bob, but I know, at least looking at like in the route performance report for all the other commuter routes, for the most part, I think there was maybe 1 or 2 exceptions. It was by and far very similar trends across the rest of the state, but I don't know specifically if they're going to cars or working from home less or more, excuse me.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
All right, Chapin, you're up, please.
Great, thanks so much. Yes, great presentation. I came in a little late, so apologies if this was addressed. I think I was trying to get somewhere close to where Bob was too, in the sense of trying to understand, do we know whether the folks who are on our commuter routes are more or less transit dependent than those on our more urban route?
We don't have any statistics in particular, Chapin, but we do know anecdotally, just talking to drivers, that that certainly the demographics have changed, that it is more transit dependent riders on the commuter links than it was pre-pandemic, where there was standing room only on the Montpelier Link back in the
Right.
day.
In my second question is, and maybe you covered this in the presentation that I missed, what is the financial benefit if we were to consider winding down the commuter routes? Is there given that they're $30 a ride versus much less, is there an aggressive kind of focus on more local routes, and what does that mean for our financial picture if we were to unwind those commuter routes? Just as
So part of it, the at least the link routes, those are not supported by any particular municipality. Those all the GMT members sort of help subsidize the cost of those routes. The Milton commuter does have the monies that Milton does pay towards that service. I will say also, from another funding perspective, pretty much CMAQ funding does cover a good portion of, say, the number one route, and so that's, from an hours perspective and a funding perspective, that's a lot different makeup in terms of the funding split that GMT has to put in, say, to that service versus, again, those link services, which are not funded as they probably should be.
And if I could have Nick activate for a moment. Nick, could you describe the 5311 and the rural municipal contributions that go towards the commuter service?
I don't believe there are any, right? I mean, is
Yeah,
that a
thank
quick
you.
question? Okay.
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to confirm. And so right
but-
now it's entirely paid for out of urban.
Yeah. Just want to point out that, I mean, the real main cost of operating service is salary and benefits and whatnot. So there's no real difference when you kind of look at the cost structure of providing that service. But the funding does change a little bit with some of those routes covered by CMAQ.
Thank you. Tasha, and then Phil, and then Michael.
Thanks so much. And that was a really good presentation. I think I struggle sometimes, though, just to follow up on Michael's point, is that we seem to be doing really thorough work on identifying which routes are less performing. But the feedback I often get about GMT is that we are a high cost organization. So I guess I'd love to understand about like how we are looking at fees and how we are looking at cost control in light of these very tough decisions we have to make. Thanks.
Well, I'll just respond. I think that that's exactly why I want this group to think about the cost for bringing a person in from Franklin or Washington County, and to essentially let us know if there is a priority that the board has for cost containment by moving as many people as we can with limited funds. And if we focus on moving as many people as we can with our limited funds, then that would be moving away from Lincoln commuter service.
All right, Phil, and then Mike, and then I have a question. Try not to forget.
Yeah, thanks. Just a question, it's a great presentation. A question about capacity. So some of these routes, these urban routes, for example, are they near capacity? Because whether they're carrying 2 people or 25 people, the cost is the same, essentially. So do we have data on which routes are near capacity, or do we have 50% more capacity on average? Thanks.
Yeah, so Phil, yes. So typically, on the 1 and the 2, which are our most popular routes, we do know sort of times of the day when we are either reaching capacity or at capacity. For example, like this past Saturday, we know that during the like 11 to 4 p.m. timeframe, the number 1 Wilson bus is pretty much at capacity and sometimes has to deny folks because the bus is too full, as UVM and Champlain kids are coming back and going to the U-Mall. And that was sort of part of the thought process in the presentation 2 weeks ago, and sort of the concept of looking at our service more from a corridor perspective and less on the route specific. And so, you know, recognizing that there is crowding on, say, the number one, that's why, you know, we're hoping to sort of put through some changes to the 1 and the 11, where basically there would be a 15-minute corridor between Burlington, downtown Burlington, and the Dorset Street area, to help alleviate some of that capacity, as well as some of the other things that we spoke about earlier about trying to, you know, match service to where development is happening. But yeah, that's one way that we're trying to rebalance the service to address those capacity concerns.
Along those, thank you. Along those lines, I guess, have you been able to give projections on what additional revenue growth would occur? Yeah, because we're talking about cost containment, and that by, you know, getting rid of the routes for commuters and links would save, I think you said, about half of the time that you needed, 8,000 and change. But that means you have additional resources. And I guess to Phil's question and other people's questions, besides increasing the tariffs, just increasing the frequency of travel along these corridors, but also I think, as you've shown, some reimagination of routes has actually, you know, forestalled a drop in ridership. In fact, has led to increased ridership. I mean, it would be an easier, I guess, decision to make if it's, you know, we're saving 8,500 hours, but we're also driving X revenues because of this additional repositioning of resources. Is that something that's possible?
Sorry, I was on mute. It's certainly possible. I don't have, you know, that particular projection they're talking about, but I certainly get the concept that you're talking about.
I do think that as we, you know, measure potential fare revenue, keeping in mind that, you know, what we saw was that an urban route is going to be $10 or less per ride. So that $2 fare revenue, you know, is going to cover a bigger portion of the cost. And since there's going to be roughly 2 to 3 times as many potential riders on the local as there would be on the commuter, you know, based on the cost per rider, you know, we would have greater fare revenue by focusing on local ridership.
Okay, I have a question. I was thinking about those, specifically the Franklin County commuter routes, and I was wondering if there's any way to know how many of those folks are taking the bus from, like, thinking about the Alberg route. How many of those Alberg folks are staying within Franklin County, and how many of them are traveling down to Chittenden County? Do you have any idea?
Most likely 0 to 1. Part of it is because the transfer only works in the morning, but not in the afternoon. So it's pretty unlikely that folks are using the service to go the entirety of that corridor from, say, Alberg to Burlington, between those 2 routes.
So it's mostly serving folks staying within Franklin County.
Correct. They're pretty much, for, like, on the Alberg, for example, they're pretty much going to the industrial park and then all returning back along those stops along the route.
So it's hard to compare them to an urban route, since it's really serving the rural population.
Right. Yes. I guess the point I was trying to make with at least the performance report is just how, you know, the state looks at, you know, the way that service is, and so they're comparing all of our commuter routes. So that includes our urban commuter routes with the rural commuter routes in our service area, as well as, you know, the other commuter routes across the entirety of the state, which, you know, in some areas may serve even less dense areas than some of our commuter routes.
Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, Austin, doing too many things at once. Go for it.
No worries. So, following up, I think it was Bob's question earlier. I missed who asked it, but somebody asked about just kind of if we know about the ridership on these routes, if they're shifted to more transit dependent folks, compared to our traditional ridership on the commuter routes. And I was wondering if we did have any additional data on that, if those folks were, through the app, if we can tell if those folks are, lower income or potentially eligible for other human services dollars outside of ridership if we broaden our scope. And then, I guess I'll start with that.
So yes, we do have, I'm blanking on the percentage that I spoke about from the last meeting, but yes, we do know, by and far a large, I think it was, I don't want to get it wrong, but I want to say over 80 or 90% of, say, our smart card users are all discount riders, for example. And that made up, I don't remember what percentage of our total ridership, but from that standpoint, that's certainly one area that we have some level of data within our own system.
And that's on the commuter routes, to clarify.
That was on the commuter. Sorry, that was just across the board.
And then I suppose the other thing is what we looked at as the state's looking at, and this has been a debate that we've had as a board over the years about commuter routes, their cost per rider is potentially high, but their emissions reductions per rider are also high. Is that something we've looked into from a perspective of, the state's multiple mandates around affordability, but also desire for climate mitigation? Do these have stronger emission profiles than, say, our urban routes?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't done the sort of calculation to figure out what that is based off of, say our ridership on the commuter and links and where they're coming from. So I don't have the information.
Yeah, it'd just be interesting to have that in the context of talking with policymakers, as there's, the push and pull of many goals. Obviously, we want to push, resources to best cost per ride, but legislators and our state have legal obligations to lower emissions. And if folks would like us to keep running these commuter routes to help with those emission goals, it might be worth looking at the cost differently. And that's not our mandate. That would mean we need some outside money for that. So that's just something for consideration.
Austin, I think that you're bringing up a great point because, I'm sure that our municipalities, if they were to fully understand that they are paying the full, cost out of 5307 funds and the local match funds, for a service that's connecting rural, I'm sure that they would want the state to contribute towards that so that the, and I don't think that considering the amount of additional funds that we're asking for municipalities, asking them to continue to subsidize this service is something that we want to do.
And as I kind of pointed out, I don't think necessarily in our mandate, I think it's an objective we have, but I don't necessarily think that we need to be, as we have in the past, thinking about the emissions profile of our service, when we're trying to use these 5307 funds to the best of our ability, to the most efficient use. But I know policymakers, tiers above us are thinking about that. So this might be a nice place where they can have dual purposes for those funds, and they can help people who are primarily, transit dependent commute while also reducing emissions in a tough sector for the state.
Thanks. Dan, did you want to respond to this particular topic before we go to Mike and then Susan?
Yes, just about Clayton's remarks around the urban supporting 100% of at least the Link Express. I'm looking at your cost, your budget to actuals right here, and I see, and this is for October, by the way, and I see a rural link cost allocation where there is a portion of the Link Express that is being transferred over to 5311. So I just want the board, and maybe Nick can comment on that if I'm reading that line incorrectly, but it does look like there is a portion of the costs of that Link Express that are being bared by 5311 through that transfer.
That's that is my understanding is that's a urban route that's being done by a rural driver, Dan. So that's why there's an allocation of the cost. So it's really just reimbursing the rural side reimbursing the urban side for the labor of a rural driver doing an urban route. So I wouldn't say that it's necessarily subsidizing that route, I guess.
Okay. Thanks for that question and the clarification, Mike, and then Susan, go ahead.
In the discussion with, TBT and RCT, was the issue of their possibly taking on any of these link routes, commuter routes raised? Is their operating model make it more cost effective or more sort of sustainable than ours?
My understanding is that there is, at least for Tri-Valley Transit, a potential for them to take over some of the Montpelier Link service, and they have successfully taken over the 116 commuter and the Middlebury Link service. I think in regards to RCT, the expectation is that we would continue to provide that service if it were to continue to exist.
Okay, go ahead, Susan.
Yeah, so just following up on Austin's comments about considering the impact on carbon emissions, I think that an analysis would also have to include this idea of what kind of reductions might happen if we were able to do more service in the urban area. And again, I think it goes back to that question of what is the opportunity in the urban area for picking up more ridership with some of the reimagined service that we've already begun to do. I think the other thing to consider is potential impact to traffic congestion, which is a growing concern in the area. So if that kind of analysis would be done, I think it'd have to look at both sides. Thanks.
Okay. Other questions on this? Which we'll continue to talk about and be able to review more after the meeting. And then we do, within this kind of conversation, we do need to relook at our Pine Street, which was proposed to be changed when we were together a couple weeks ago and went out to public comment. And so that's an action item. So if all are comfortable, we'll move on to that portion of the conversation. Okay, go ahead, Chris.
Great. So yeah, in short, it's a very short memo. This is a change that we have to make given that the road network is changing due to the construction of the Champlain Parkway. So this route, I think I forgot to put it in the memo, but would go into effect March 3rd, should the board approve this routing. And so to highlight, this is accessing in the southern portion near our office here, would access the Champlain Parkway, no longer serve Queen City Park Road and the lower portion of Pine Street south of Home Ave, and then would also include a realignment of no longer serving Howard Street and part of St. Paul, and serving a portion of Pine Street going north up to Kilburn to serve more of the businesses along there. So this is, as Amy mentioned, an action item that we're looking for board approval for.
Before anybody wants to make a motion, does it make it just a more efficient? It looks like it makes it a more direct, faster route. Does it change the timing of it?
So right now we're leaving the sort of the timing exactly the same, just given that there's still another season or two of construction, and that we made some adjustments because of the existing construction in the Pine Street area. So for now, it would be relatively the same, but we certainly would look at that in the future.
Thanks. Any questions, or does anybody want to make a motion to approve? Chapin?
I'll just say thanks to staff for working through this, and I support the recommendation. We can long-term look. This Champlain Parkway project is, as I've said many times, is a good project, but it's not a perfect project. It has legacy elements of its design that are not current. Not current design that would really enhance connectivity. We are losing a component of our street grid connectivity, but gaining another. And I think long-term, I look forward to working with GMT on whether there's further adjustments that can be made, but this is a good interim step, and I appreciate staff's work on this. Thank you. I'll make a motion to approve.
Thank you, Chapin. We have a second?
I'll
Thanks,
second.
Phil. Oh, Phil was first. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Or abstentions? Okay, Pine Street is, adjustment is approved. Thanks so much. And get back to my agenda. It looks like we are ready and nearly just on time to discuss the operating budget. So I'm going to pass that to Nick.
Actually,
So-
if I could interrupt. And since we do have a few minutes before for this is scheduled, just if the board could provide some guidance to Chris and I about whether you all would like to see additional reductions in the link as part of the package that we consider, depending on what the governor's budget is. Or if the board would like us to leave link as it is and focus on local service for June 2025.
Like right now?
Well, you know, I'm not necessarily saying that we have to have a motion, but if board members are interested in seeing how having the link is part of the mix of additional reductions, then we can include it. If nobody is interested in that, then we wouldn't.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think it's, you know, we have to look at all options on the table. I think that's just the reality of the situation. I think we would be sort of not doing our proper due diligence if we didn't explore all the possibilities. So I think it's part of the efforts that we can do to basically bring us towards a sustainable model. It would be incumbent upon to look at it, you know, at a minimum, be talking to TBT. Would they be inclined to take on the route, you know, with the goal of, you know, being conscious that there are people who are very dependent on this ridership. But I think we have to put it on the table. Otherwise, I think we're limiting our options. And I think in terms of getting more money from the state, if we haven't shown a willingness to explore everything, I don't think that makes them predisposed to being helpful.
Andrea and then Raj.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it also just sort of seeing potential changes to the link stacked up against potential urban potential local reductions, I think would help sort of contextualize the sort of relative costs of these services too. So it would be useful to see them. It's a little hard to see everything together when we're sort of comparing commuter routes to commuter routes and local routes to local routes, but having all of those things in the mix for how we can look at on the menu for how we can look at the best possible sort of reductions and what we can keep would be helpful.
Go ahead, Raj.
Thanks. Good morning. Came late to this conversation, so at the risk of commenting where it's not relevant, I'll just echo what's been said before. And I'd be curious too to see on these routes the impact of a fare increase and the impact. I'd like to know how, you know, if there's a way to do an analysis on how many of these riders are covered by CATMA agreements. And you know, what options are there for adjusting those rates as well. So my understanding is they're longer routes. I'm not 100% sure. I'm assuming they're the same rate. So I, as a municipal person, would be very curious to see the logic behind having those, you know, how that would all play out. So whether we're going to adjust, whether GMT does it, the schedule changes, what are fare implications if we, instead of changing the schedule, the fares go up for the longer rides? What businesses would be most impacted by that? And has anyone gone to them and said, you know, as an organization, you need to pay more money, or we'd like you to anyway? So those would be questions I'd be curious about.
Thank you, Raj.
So it sounds like let's look under every rock and see what happens. I think that's the sentiment that I just heard, but also understanding the implications. And I'm just going to go back to my question about kind of the thinking about, you know, Alberg to Georgia and St. Albans. You know, it's a link, right? It's a commuter route, but it's also not terribly different from getting people from Shelburne into Burlington, right? It's a long bus ride. It takes, you know, there's just fewer people to carry. So I just want to be careful that we're not treating it like they're driving from Alberg all the way into Burlington every day. They're using that within the region. Does that give you anywhere close, Clayton, to what you were looking for?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. All right, Nick, back to you.
So if you look in your packet on page 17, there's a very brief memo, because you've already received multiple presentations, or for some of you, multiple presentations if you're on the finance committee of the budget. Again, this year is very different than past years, as we are passing a budget with a pretty large hole, roughly, you know, close to 6% of the budget we have a deficit on. So that's a little bit different. We did do 2 public meetings. The minutes for those are also pretty slimmed down as well, just because we, to be honest with you, didn't have a ton of participation, which isn't unique actually to past public budget meetings. But you can read the minutes to see the questions that we were asked. There weren't many, to be honest. And I'm happy to answer any questions. There's also a copy of the budget as well. So what I'm looking for is just final ratification. Obviously, the board has already endorsed the budget. So this is just kind of the final step to get it passed. And then obviously we'll do a budget adjustment once we have our state grant awards completed in the fall.
Any final questions? Go ahead, Chapin.
Could the staff talk about the context of approving a deficit budget like this, and so the board is clear and the public is clear what our processes are going to be moving forward to make sure that as the fiscal year starts, that we do have a budget that is in alignment?
Well, I think, and I don't want to speak for Clayton, but I think we're waiting to see what the governor's budget has, and then work through the legislative process. Whatever the outcome of that is will obviously determine how we move forward with either service cuts or using fund balance. And so I think, you know, our mandate is to pass a balanced budget when we do the budget adjustment in August. But again, I'll let Clayton speak to anything that I said wrong there.
I think you're absolutely right. And so really, you know, the amount of service that we cut is going to be dependent on, you know, the funds that we receive, so that come August, whatever we present will be balanced.
Go ahead, Tasha.
Oh, thanks so much. Just a quick question. I know it's early and we're waiting on the governor's budget address, but do we have any update on how stuff is going in the legislature?
So I can tell you that the legislature on the Senate side jumped into rural transfer really early. And so VTrans and Stedman Hill presented a week ago today, last Tuesday, and I presented on Wednesday. And so so there seems to be a lot of interest in the transfer study. We have not had official contact from the House Transportation Committee yet, other than through the Nick Racing Group, just asking us to be patient and that they will get us on their schedule as their time allows.
Thanks. Dan?
Oh yeah, just to Tasha's question, VTrans Ross is in there today, this afternoon with the House, presenting on the public transit side. And so happy to share what the outcomes of that meeting are. But Ross is giving the overview today to House.
Thanks. Okay. Looking for a motion to approve the operating budget.
I'll make that motion, Amy.
Thank you, Susan.
I'll
Do we have a
second.
I have no
I'll
idea
second.
who that was.
Catherine.
Thank you, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Any additional questions? Discussions? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
Tasha, you are opposing?
No, I was saying aye. Sorry, I lost track of where the button was.
That's okay. That's why I'm
Apologies.
confirming. All right. Any abstain? All right. The motion passes. Thanks for walking us through that multiple times so that it makes it easier that we can vote on it when it's time.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. We are ready for Katma's update. Hoping Sandy is here.
I don't think that she is.
She's not here yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I know that her timing situation is that she gets grandchildren on the bus at 8:30, so she'll probably be joining momentarily. If we wanted to jump to items number 8.
Sure, let's do that.
And so item 8 is to delegation of approval for the final legislative report. And so what I would be asking is that we introduce a motion and pass it to designate authority to Amy and Andrea to approve the final legislative report. Our final legislative report will look very much like our interim legislative report, except for it will have an update on Fauble study that he presented to us the last time. It will have an executive summary where our previous one did not. That will just be a one-pager at the beginning of the document that will summarize what's included. It will also include a laundry list in the beginning of all of the items that we are doing to either reduce our costs or to develop additional revenue. And so that was something that we had discussed at our retreat, so that it's clear right at the beginning of the document, the items that we are doing to address the situation internally. And so that is due on February 1st. And so happy to take any additional feedback on items that that we should include in the report. And but that's what I would be just asking for is for our chair and vice to be able to do the final approval.
Any questions, concerns about that? Okay. So we get to vote on that. So if somebody would like to make a motion.
So
I'm
moved.
happy to, oh, I'll second then.
Thank you, Michael and Catherine. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Or abstain? All right, the motion passes. You give authority to Andrea and myself to approve that final report, which is due, I don't know what today is, in 10 days or so. All
Thank
right.
you, everyone.
Yeah, that's a good call to save time. And oh, Sandy, I do think is here. Welcome, Sandy. We were just stalling and waiting for you. I appreciate it. You joining us today. So we're going to move to our CAPMA update presentation.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
Thanks. Thanks for welcome and thanks for being here.
Yeah, good morning. Hope everyone had a nice holiday weekend. Sandy Teba, Executive Director at CAPMA. And first, I just want to thank those of you who attended the CAPMA Summit back in October. Was great to have you present. Really appreciated Clayton's participation in our morning general session as well. We're going to be hosting our 4th summit on Tuesday, October 14th, 2025 at the UVM Davis Center. And we'll be releasing a call for papers in a couple of months. As Clayton mentioned, as part of our UA agreement, this is an opportunity for CAPMA to connect with the GMT board on a regular basis, which we appreciate. At your October 1st meeting, I had shared a brief overview of CAPMA. I talked about our membership and our engagement with businesses, developers, and municipalities in Chittenden County, gave a little history on our transit program and utilization. And for this meeting, I had mentioned I would share just a few of the transit data points from our surveys, which I will do in a second. I know I have just, I think, 10 or 15 minutes on the calendar, and I want to be respectful of that. But a few quick updates. I know there's some moving pieces with GMT's service reduction plan, and appreciate everyone's hard work on this. CAPMA, UVM, and the Medical Center did provide some letters of feedback back in September, which I saw were included in the November interim legislative report. We're really asking GMT to consider implementing service to Market Street with many UVM and Medical Center students and employees living there, which sounds like may be in consideration. The airport obviously is very important. Maintaining connections to the Medical Center as well. So we'll keep our ears and eyes open as things evolve, and anything we can do to help or data, please feel free to reach out. I wanted to give you a couple of quick member updates. CAPMA recently onboarded a new residential member, City West Property, which is adjacent to August 1st. It's a residential property, has 48 units. So we have onboarded them. We're also finalizing our MOU with City Place Partners for the opening of the South Building, which is expected in May. We're excited about this member. It's our first multi-use member. So the audience includes residents, 53 units opening, a hotel with 159-ish rooms, employees for the commercial sites. So we're in the process of drafting a comprehensive TDM plan for the site, which ideally would include a transit benefit, some form of a transit benefit program. And Clayton and I have talked in the past about what a transit program for developers, residential and commercial, might look like. I know Katie recently was chatting with Jamie at GMT. The city of Burlington is, I believe, in process of updating their parking TDM ordinance this year, which will require some form of a transit subsidy or commitment for new developers. So I look forward to continuing our conversations, Clayton and GMT staff, on what a program for developers might look like and how we can collaborate to get them on board. You may have seen on the news, Bird Bike Share will not be returning to our region this spring, as we had hoped. Byrd notified CATMA last week that due to costs and revenues in a small market, the system was not sustaining itself. CATMA held the contract with Byrd, and we had MOUs with the 3 municipalities, Burlington, South Burlington, and Winooski, and our institutional partners. Obviously, we're really disappointed about this because it really was a nice transportation option in our region, really added to our network. It served the first and last mile challenges. It removed cars off the road, it exposed people to biking. It wasn't perfect, but we were making progress. We had a lot of good feedback from users and from the public. So we'll meet with our partners in the coming weeks and talk about if, what, and when the next iteration of bike share might look like. But in the meantime, we'll continue to encourage our members to optimize the systems that's in place. And I think I see a hand up.
Yeah, hey Sandy, it's Susan Grasso.
Hi.
I'm just gonna throw a big idea out there. I know we're not in a great place to talk about doing big new things at GMT, but just want to plant a seed maybe into the future about looking at somehow a joint cooperation or relationship between GMT and a bike share program that might be offered locally. There's a lot of obviously connections between making it easier for people to kind of, do that last mile to a transit stop, then have kind of continuous service, maybe through one payment option. So it just came to mind as you were updating us on the situation with Byrd as something maybe when the time is right to start thinking about. Thanks.
Yes, good to be thinking creatively and innovatively. I think that's something we can talk about. Thanks. Is there any other hands? Okay. Just moving on to a couple of advocacy updates from CATMA. CATMA is a member of the Transportation for Vermonters Coalition, which GMT is a member of as well. Jamie sits on that committee. And we just released our 2025 legislative priorities. There's a document on the T4VT website, and all the legislators will be receiving it if they haven't already from VNRC, who manages the T4VT coalition. But one of our number one request in the priorities is that the legislature identify and enact new dedicated sources of funding to ensure accessible public transportation as recommended in the transit studies that have been conducted. And today, CATMA will, and some of the coalition members will be submitting a letter to the House Transportation Committee, urging them to align the state's budget with the needs of Vermonters, starting with funding to fill critical gaps in access to public transit through the Budget Adjustment Act. I don't know a lot about it. I'm learning about it. But it's something that could maybe be a solution. And I'm sure Clayton knows more, and can talk more about that. But CATMA and some of our T4VT coalition members will be sending letters to House Transportation Committee members today. So that's all I had for updates. And let me see if I can share my screen. Am I able to do that? GMT stuff?
Yes, you should be able to hit the green share button at the bottom and then select the document.
Thank you.
And thank you for the advocacy, especially in regard to the budget adjustment.
Let's see. Did I share the right screen?
We see it looks like a Word document.
Sorry, 1 second.
There we go.
This is the T4VT legislative priority list I mentioned earlier. You can see here is the funding structure for transit that that the coalition is advocating for, and down below here, excuse me, are members of the coalition. So just wanted to share 3 slides on some survey results from our fall survey.
Sandy, can we go back just one slide for 1
Sure.
second? I'm trying to
Sure.
look at who the T4VT members are and whether you have any healthcare folks in there. So.
No, they are not per se.
Okay.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually just learned about, and many of you probably already know, that this Act 167, the Oliver Wyman report, I mean, the number one ask is we need to fix transportation to, help with our healthcare system. So, but that's a good point. I'll bring it up at our next meeting.
Yes, please. I think there might be some healthcare partners out there.
Yeah, great. Anything else? Can't. Okay. So CATMA transportation survey. So every year we conduct employee and student transportation surveys at our institutions and all of our employer members. This year we invited almost 12,000 employees at the institutions and our membership to participate in our survey. The overall employee response rate was 25%, and the majority of them represent institutional employees. And then our students on and off campus, we receive about a 16% response rate, and the majority of them being on campus students. For, I guess, looking at the primary mode, I just have a couple of years here. 2024 versus 2023. The drive alone for employees is about 61%, just slightly down from 62% in 2023. Our off-campus drive alone in 2024, this is interesting, is 30%, down from the 37% in 2023. I think that off-campus students are biking and walking more, and transit. So just a couple highlights on drive alone. On transit, you can see employees' transit use kind of remained consistent to what it was in 2023. For employees and the off-campus students, transit use in 2024 was 19%, which is down from 21% in 2023. So I guess that increase in transit for off-campus wasn't true, what I just said. On-campus students, the transit use is 28%. It's up from 27% in 2023, just slightly. And then you can see the walk bike for off-campus students was a 42% in 2024 versus 35% in 2023. So interesting. On the right here are what people, employees and students selected as their top routes anytime that they're taking transit. So it was kind of a check all that apply question. So here are some of the top routes for employees and students collectively on and off campus. And certainly, we could break it out if that was of interest. And I want to thank Chris this year, again, as part of our UA agreement. We had asked GMT some input on shared our survey script with them for employees and students, and Chris provided us some recommendations on question, and this was being one of them. What factors prevent you from using the GMT bus system? So you can see the employee and student responses. I mean, I think there's a clear connection of the factors that are, the same for employees and students. The top two for employees is that the timing doesn't work well with their work schedule. Routes are not connecting to desired locations or long travel times. And similar to with students, the timing not working well with their schedule. They prefer other transportation modes, interesting, and service too infrequent. And then some of the others here, we just listed them here, what some people wrote, and the other was not understanding how the bus system and app works, haven't found the need to take the bus, walking and biking works most of the time, or not reliable. And the last slide here is just some snippets, try to put some good and some constructive feedback here. We have hundreds of comments that we'd be happy to share more with your staff as interested. And just some comments here from employees and from students. And I can share this presentation if you want to include it in your packet and folks want to come back to it. And that is all I had for an update. Save the date for the summit, CATMA's contacts. Any questions? I can't, let's see. Looks like there's stuff in chat, but.
Yeah, you might be able to see faces if you stop sharing, if that's okay with everybody.
All right.
And then I think in the chat, Austin thankfully put the link to the Oliver Wyman report on healthcare. And it does say that in order for the healthcare system to work, transportation needs to get fixed.
Right.
That's all it says. But it opens the opportunity for healthcare partners, which is why I keep asking about healthcare partners.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for mentioning. And that's all I had. If there's any questions. Well,
You'll
thank
be
you
able
so
to share
much.
the slides because it'll be fun to kind of look at that survey data a little bit more in depth.
Sure, I will share it with Clayton,
Yeah,
I guess.
yeah.
And, okay, thank you.
Thanks for being here.
Sandy.
All right, we are plugging right along. We are going to move on to the Unified Planning Work Program. I think it's an application. And I'm guessing this is Chris again. I could be wrong.
Back to me. Another item for today. I'll just add one point from the last discussion. We, to the point around healthcare and transit, one of the things we recently were working with CATMA on was getting data from UVM Medical Center as an employer and where folks live. So as we think about service changes, trying to get a little bit more granular information on where folks live and what UVM Medical Center campus they work at. So that's moving in the right direction, at least from trying to improve transit from that perspective. So just wanted to add that point as well. So moving on to the UPWP application. So this is something every year that CCRPC puts together. This is essentially their work plan for the entire year and funds many of their planning projects, whether that's done in-house by staff or through a consultant. And it also includes other applications like pass-through funds that GMT receives, or other organizations like CATMA and other nonprofits in the area also apply for additional UPWP funds to do different projects. And so over the past couple of years, we've brought the application to the board for just a gut check, see if it matches what folks are thinking. And then, we pass that along that it's been approved by our board to the UPWP committee at TCRPC, which then eventually gets approved by their board. You know, there's a lot of information in the work plan that I provided in the board packet. One sort of overarching theme that isn't explicitly written there is really sort of building blocks was the theme of what I was trying to put in here. You know, there's a lot of stuff that we've talked about over the past few years, especially now with service reductions. And, you know, one of the big things for me that I want those that use the funds for different projects is, you know, how can we build the systems for our service? So, you know, from the service planning side, you'll see in there, it talks about actually having service guidelines. And I think that will help the board through that discussion of, you know, staff works on that and working with board input and input from the public. What are the priorities of the board and the organization for service? So that's one sort of building block document piece that I think is certainly missing that we really need. Another piece in there that I'll highlight is around our work on shelter and amenities. And so this is something that I know has come up a lot at previous board meetings and something that staff has been working internally on to address. And again, that comes with, I think, additional building block documents that I think help, you know, make it clear to the public, clear to the board, and clear to staff, you know, how we decide where and when and what type of amenities we put at our bus stops to hopefully increase ridership. There's also, you know, a litany of projects. A big majority of these funds go to staff time, both in the planning department and the capital project staff, as well as rider experience staff. And so, you know, these funds are split across a multitude of staff for different projects. And then finally, one other piece that we included in there is also a line item that we haven't had previously, which was for professional development. Last year, we got limited funds for professional development as an organization, and that's something that I think is really important. So we wanted to make sure to include that as part of our application this year, so we can see what others are doing elsewhere across the country. I'm not going to go through too many details. I'll just see if there's any questions from folks on the application itself.
Sorry, my mute and I were disagreeing. Any questions? Chapin.
Just a brief comment to thank the RPC for this great support and offering these opportunities, and Chris for putting together a very comprehensive application here. It is neat to see a number of our kind of emerging technological improvements here that can hopefully improve our service and our efficiency. So great to see these included. Thanks, Chris and everyone.
Thank you, Chip. And I forgot to highlight one exciting project that is in there is a pilot project on automatic passenger counters. So we do have actual sensors on 6 of our buses. And so some of the additional cost that's in that grant application is for some of the software and backend items to actually see that data and use that for service planning purposes as we think about adjusting service.
Thank you. Go ahead, Michael.
I just wanted to add that I'm very happy to see that commitment to professional development. Our modern world, I agree, Chape, and technology is going to give us all these great benefits. But it's so important to be sure that we also invest in our people. It's the people that really makes the organization grow. And we know that one of the things we've talked about is the sort of hollowing out of the central staff at the and overburdening our people. Hopefully this is a shift in the other direction, and I think will pay great dividends. So kudos for adding that.
Thank you. Questions or comments, Susan? Or are you just preparing for a motion?
No, I just wanted to thank staff for putting this together and the CCRPC. I'm excited by a lot of the projects that I see here. And I just had one question. I was wondering if we could get a little bit more information about the transportation working groups item, number 7.
Yeah, so there's sort of 2 pieces in there. So number 7 that you pointed out, that really is pointing out staff time that's related to attending various, regional or local meetings. say like a scoping study for, you know, a particular project in Burlington or elsewhere. But that also ties into the under the additional planning project section. There's a piece around regional coordination. So one of the things is really making sure that GMT is aligned with the work that CCRPC is doing. And so one of the things we'll be doing in the new fiscal year is sort of, once this whole UPWP process is done, that really does dictate a lot of the projects that go on in a region. And so we'll be sitting down on a very regular basis with CCRPC on those projects and figuring out what level of involvement, you know, GMT wants or needs to be at for all the various projects that go on, so that we have a seat at the table as many things as we can handle.
Is that something that's new this year as a UPWP kind of funded project?
The regional coordination item?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was something that was new. You know, it's something that happens, I think, informally, but we wanted to formalize it this year. And that was something that came out of a conversation that we had in talking with CCRPC staff.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this item. So yeah, thanks for putting that together and including it. I'm wondering too about, so that'll give you increased capacity to work at the local level too, with local communities around there.
Correct. So
that about the O'Brien development there off of Irish Hill, and there's been talk about, you know, GMT providing service up there, and so that's the kind of thing where I think it's really important that we're in on those conversations before communities, you know, make a decision about whether to support them or not.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And it's twofold. So it really is, you know, being able to have the staff capacity for those conversations, the long-term service conversations, but also the staff capacity for all the construction that is going on. We recognize that does impact our riders, you know, in the moment. And so trying to better coordinate that with respective municipalities and the contractors that are actually doing the work. So that's part of that as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Great, thank you.
Okay. Any other thoughts, discussions, questions? And if not, we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make that motion, Amy.
Second.
Thank you, and thank you. Any further discussion? I just was going to pause and say, we probably should say I move to approve, or allude to the actual thing that or the language in the agenda.
Sure, I move to approve GMT's UPWP application.
Beautiful, thank you. That worked for you too, Chapin? Yep, beautiful. Okay, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Abstentions? Beautiful. Okay, moving right along to our last item we actually have time to do, which is kind of nice, is our committee report. Sorry, second to last item. And we can go through that, and I'll start with leadership, and leadership didn't meet. So there we go. And Bob, workforce, right?
Workforce did not meet.
See, this is fast. And Paul's not here from finance. Is somebody able to walk through finance?
Yeah, I can. We just went over the financials through October. I don't know if you want me to go into detail on where that stands. We're, I think, kind of where we would expect to be on the urban side. On the rural side, we have a slight loss that is primarily due to the E&D program, but we're hoping that should improve in the coming months as we make some changes in terms of just the grant billing and fees that we assess to it. So
thanks. Chapin, I saw your hand.
Yeah, great. Yes, Nick covered an amazing amount of material during the Finance Committee, as he often does. And one of the pieces I did raise that Michael talked about is that I pushed for us to look at how we can diversify our revenue strategy and look at some of the ways through our technological payment systems, that we are recovering the cost of the use of those systems, whether it be accepting credit cards or the phone app. And so I appreciated staff saying they'd look into that as we're trying to make the budget connect this year. Thanks.
Thank you. Performance.
We won't be meeting on Thursday. And we did have some discussions that I think I'm confusing the meetings, but we've had a lot of discussions around the fleet and different issues of electrification and other options for reducing emissions. Clayton, do you want to add to that?
Sure. And so we're projected to talk about carbon reduction strategies at our February meeting, tied in with what Tasha just described. And at our March meeting, we're going to be taking a look at returning to having a metrics dashboard. So those are the things coming up.
Okay. And governance also didn't meet in January.
But they will be meeting on Friday.
But we will be meeting on Friday. And if I looked at my calendar more than 10 seconds ahead of where I'm going, I would have known that. And while we're talking about committees, I realize that we have a couple new alternates in Charlene and Ruben, and I'm not sure who else that we could consider where their services might be best utilized on a committee. I know Workforce has had some challenges with quorum, and I'm not sure about performance. So I don't know whether we do this just Andrea, me, and you and Clayton, or does this go to leadership? How do we? I think it's probably, I'm just supposed to assign people, correct? I'm supposed to make a decision. Is that what you're asking me all to do?
I think that certainly at our next Amy, Andrea, and myself meeting, that we could go over where the gaps are in our current committee structure.
Okay. Thank you. Surprise, Ruben, this is your first meeting and we're going to make you do more work. So forgive us.
That's fine.
Even better. Thank you. All right, that is our committee reports, and we have ample time for commissioner comments. Does anybody have a comment that they want to share?
I had a question, and this goes back to earlier in the meeting. A lot of the metrics that were being presented during the finance conversation were on a per trip basis, and that's kind of neither. I mean, that's right. That's a pretty standard unit. Does GMT have the data resolution to think about generating metrics on a per passenger mile basis for some of those comparisons between routes?
I can speak to that. So yeah, that's part of the rationale behind the automatic passenger counter. So having that information helps us get that data. Otherwise, the current data that we do have is sort of a one trip sample of every trip in our system, which is ride check, which is that's what's mentioned in the UPWP application. So that's the best data that we have for that data point. But the APCs will help us get us there better data in the future.
Thank you. Thanks for that question and the response. Any other comments? I'll share that I'm super excited. I convinced my 15-year-old and her 15-year-old friend to hop on the number 10 from Taft Corners to our house when it was really cold and they were going to walk, and they had a great time. The driver was super helpful, and they figured it out. And they were the only people on the number 10 at that moment. So I get the problem. So anyway, they had a great experience. She said it was a 10 out of 10 and took a selfie. So she's an appropriate 15-year-old. All right. With no other thoughts or comments or stories, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. And second? All right. Lots of seconds. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Anyone want to stay here all day? Good. Wonderful. Thank you all for being here and for staff and commissioner brains and attention and effort to make this organization run as best as we possibly can and to serve all the needs that we're faced with. I hope you all enjoy the sunshine, if not going outside to play. Take care.
Thank you all.
Hey, Amy, can I ask you a quick question?
Yes, of course. I'll stay right here.
Sure. So I actually have a meeting with Katie Gallagher today from T4VT. She puts together the committee. And if you send me a list of healthcare folks that you're thinking of that might be good participants for that committee, I'm happy to talk to her about that. She and I were actually chatting offline just during the meeting. And she—
Awesome. Clayton, stay for a second if you would.
Yeah.
And she, now that she, now that the legislative priorities are set for the year, she has some more capacity to bring folks on. So happy
Okay.
to facilitate that.
Well, so I'm thinking of two things. One, I see, Susan, do you have a quick thing before, or you want to add to this conversation?